So our first speaker today is Dr. Mark Turner, and I'm delighted that Mark could join us today. Mark is going to be speaking about the relationship between patient safety culture and staff burnout, conundrum or cure. Mark graduated from Liverpool Vet School in 1996 and entered small animal practice in London, where he still lives. After several first opinion posts and a spell running a practice, he became interested in inpatient safety and quality improvement. In 2017, he graduated from RBC with a research master's degree in patient safety culture and currently splits his time between clinical work and writing on the subject of patient safety and QI. He's also interested in the relationship between veterinary patient safety culture and staff engagement, well-being, and productivity. So I'm going to hand over to Mark, who I accidentally introduced as doctor earlier, despite being a vet. He's not using that title today. So over to you, Mark.
Hi there.
Hi.
Thanks so much, Rosie. Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure to be here today. My name is Mark, as Rosie said, and I have an interest in patient safety culture, and my research at the RBC was into patient safety culture in the veterinary profession. And yeah, today's topic is the relationship between patient safety culture and burnout, conundrum or cure. So as I say, my research was into patient safety culture, but I'm also interested in the possible links between burnout. So I thought we'd explore that topic this afternoon. So yeah, in a little bit more detail, we're going to be looking at burnout, represented here by a slightly leaky bucket, and I'm going to be defining patient safety culture, represented by this green bucket, and also a possible relationship between the two. So as I say, my research was specifically into patient safety culture, but I've become interested in possible links with burnout. So we're going to be defining burnout, and a little arrow should appear. There it is. And we'll also be diving into the green patient safety culture bucket and defining that and what makes a great patient safety culture. But I thought another way of illustrating these two areas and also a possible relationship between the two would be to tell you a little story. So this is Penny. She's a young 6-month-old female domestic short-haired moggy cat, and she needs to be neutered. So she's being brought in today by her owner, Mrs. Smith, to see Marcella. Marcella's a new graduate. She's done a few neutering procedures supervised, but Penny will be her first female neutering done by herself. She's a little bit nervous, but she's looking forward to it. Unfortunately, something does go quite seriously wrong during the procedure. Penny survives, but only just, and Mrs. Smith has to be informed of what happened. And unsurprisingly, Marcella feels desperate about this. Her employer's informed, but she's not really sure what they think about the event. She doesn't get any particular feedback about it. So she's just left feeling a bit worried, embarrassed, and possibly even a little bit ashamed, to touch on Rory's talk from earlier. So yeah, in this session, we'll be talking about any possible relationship between the way that accidents are quite innocently dealt with in practice, and vets and vet nurses' feelings around that sort of event. So what do we mean by burnout? Burnout is essentially made up of 3 things. We call these the 3 dimensions of burnout. So first of all, it's a feeling of energy depletion or chronic exhaustion. The second dimension is a sense of increased mental distance from one's job, so a sense of withdrawing, sometimes called depersonalization. Workers start feeling negative and cynical about their job. And following on from this, they also start to feel ineffectual. They lack a sense of accomplishment. lack a sense of confidence as well in their professional abilities. So that's burnout. The WHO define it as an occupational hazard, if you like, and shouldn't be used to describe other parts of one's personal life. So just emphasizing the work relatedness of burnout. I'll just move to the next slide. So burnout in the veterinary profession, what are the statistics? Well, you're probably aware of some of the statistics from last year in the US. We have a large study which showed that veterinary surgeons had a higher rate of burnout than doctors, 40% higher than in the human medical profession. And amongst vet techs or veterinary nurses, I think this study is actually from Canada, not the US, so I apologize. But they found that over half of the respondents scored above the burnout threshold for emotional exhaustion. So if you remember from that slide earlier, that's one of the 3 dimensions of burnout. So that was quite surprising to me. And one way of explaining burnout in any profession, in any industry, is something called the job demands and resources model. So 2 essential components of any job in any industry or profession. We have the job demands and also the job resources. So we'll just define those quickly. The job demands being the physical, psychological, social, or organizational aspects of work that require sustained physical, cognitive, or emotional efforts from workers. And these are balanced by the job resources available. So they're the organizational aspects of work that help achieve work goals. They buffer the job demands, and they stimulate growth and learning amongst staff members. And there's some good research now to suggest that this is a valid model of burnout. And a quite well-known paper from 20 years ago now, written by Evangelia Demaruti. Evangelia did research into burnout using this model. And she found good evidence to suggest that if there is a mismatch between the job demands of a role and the job resources available to those workers, then workers are much more likely to slide into burnout. So, for example, if a job entails consistent time pressures, there may be some role ambiguity, maybe the physical environment's not all that it could be. If those factors aren't balanced out with, for example, a sense of job control, supervisory support, and a good social support network at work, then any worker in any industry or profession is much more likely to slide into burnout. So we're going to come back to this particular table later on in my talk, but we're going to leave burnout just for now and focus on patient safety culture for a moment. And I thought it would be useful just to start off by defining what a safety culture is. So a safety culture, a generic safety culture in any industry. That concept was first defined by researchers looking at highly reliable industries. So industries with remarkably low adverse event rates. So classically civil aviation or the modern nuclear power generating industry post Chernobyl. And researchers found that in these organizations consistently there was evidence of a group of organizational beliefs and behaviors that contributed to this high level of performance and this high quality service. What are some of those beliefs and behaviors? So an understanding throughout the organization of the high risk nature of the industrial goal, a consistently blame-free environment where individuals are able to report errors without fear of a reprimand, And they also found a lot of evidence that between ranks and disciplines, team members were collaborating to seek solutions to drive safety even further. And a patient safety culture is very similar in many respects. We can define it as a group of beliefs and behaviours that support and promote patient safety at work. And there's good evidence now of the beliefs and behaviours that contribute to a good patient safety culture. I'll list those in this next slide. Again, there's an understanding of the high-risk nature of the medical work or the surgical procedure. There's routine event reporting and routine auditing or analysis of those events to learn from them and to drive up quality even further. Typically, staff are involved in this group-based activity. Then there's open communication. So there's a culture of open communication where team members are able to speak up with their ideas and comments without any fear of any adverse consequence for themselves. There's a supportive team leadership style, just as in a generic safety culture. There's a non-punitive response to accidents and mistakes. So if an accident happens, then nobody is unfairly blamed. And within teams, there are clear roles and responsibilities. But I'd just like now to go back to our table from earlier, the job demands resources model. And I'm just going to highlight some words in this slide, which match up quite nicely with those job demands and resources from earlier. Oh yeah, and at the bottom of the slide we have appropriate workloads where possible. So some of those words are an involvement in decision making. Oh, that circle's moved a bit. It should be over the involvement word. Then there's, yeah, these circles have moved themselves around a bit. But the idea here is to highlight some of the words in this definition of patient safety culture that match up quite nicely with the job demands resources model. So supportive team leadership style. Within teams, there are clear roles and responsibilities, and there are appropriate workloads where possible. As I say, these circles are perhaps slightly confusing, but we'll go back to the job demands resources model. And we can highlight some of these words again. So the job demands resources model in many respects is actually a great definition of a patient safety culture. So physical workloads are reasonable. Time pressures are mitigated for in a patient safety culture. Within a patient safety culture, there are clear roles. Team members feel supported by supervisors and leaders. Team members are involved in decision making, and they have a sense of job control. So yeah, as I say, there are, in many respects, this burnout model is a great descriptor of a patient safety culture. So next, I'm going to introduce the research that we did into patient safety culture in the veterinary profession. We used a modified online patient safety culture questionnaire from the human medical profession. We had 300, oh, I need to go back. Beg your pardon. We had 335 completed surveys returned, and I've just put into a small table there some of the basic respondent demographics. So we had a quite a nice range of respondents. We had registered nurses, full-time and part-time vets, business owners, JVPs, practice managers, and members of the team with management duties. So I thought I'd pick out some of the results from our work just to demonstrate where we believe the veterinary patient safety cultures to be. This is as of 2017, I should say. So I've listed some of the statements from our original questionnaire on this slide. This one, we sometimes have to work in crisis mode, so alluding to workloads and time pressures. 2/3 of staff in non-managerial roles agreed with that statement. The next statement I've picked out is staff will freely speak up if they see something that may negatively affect patient care. Well, 59% of staff in non-managerial roles said always or most of the time. The next statement is alluding to a culture of learning. So an element of patient safety is learning from events to iteratively drive up the service quality. This time, 48% of staff said we do this always or most of the time, discussing ways to prevent errors from happening again. And the final statement I've picked out, if a mistake occurs, does it feel like the person involved is being investigated and not the event? So again, alluding to the style of investigation. Are people feeling unfairly blamed? 1/3 of staff in non-managerial roles agreed with that statement. So again, we can look at the results from our patient safety culture questionnaire through the lens of Demiruti's job demands resources model of burnout. So interestingly, there is evidence of high workloads and time pressures. We might argue that the next statement is one way of thinking about levels of involvement in decision-making from Demiruti's job demands resources model. Again, that circle should be a little higher over the involvement in decision-making statement. The next statement, again, we could say that is an example of whether people feel involved in decision-making. And the final statement alludes to levels of supervisory support. Again, the circle hasn't quite got there, but hopefully you can see what we're looking at. And finally, what about job control? And do members of the team feel as if they have a sense of job control? Well, that could be higher, 48%. There's room for improvement there. Just like to mention this paper from 7 years ago. So a group, I think they were in Holland, investigated levels of performance in the veterinary profession using Demiruti's job demands resources model. And I've just picked out one statement from the conclusion of that paper. It's important that young professionals like Marcella can work in environments that provide them with sufficient job resources. Job resources as defined by the demands resources burnout model. Having access to these resources is related to increased motivation and engagement, the opposite of burnout, and through this with increased performance. So what can we say in conclusion? Well, we can say that patient safety culture is composed of a number of key behaviors, many of which mirror the job demands resources model of burnout. So we might say that the current state of patient safety culture, as investigated in our research from 2017, may be contributing to the levels of burnout that we see in the profession. So lower levels of engagement in vets and vet nurses than we might aspire to. And the same relationship, there is good evidence in the human medical literature of the same relationship, that in a good patient safety culture, levels of engagement are high and burnout is less of a problem. So there is some evidence from our work and from broader statistics on burnout in the profession that the same sort of relationship may be existing. This, I should say, in summary, is not to to blame anyone. Patient safety and patient safety culture are both new concepts to the profession, but the good news is that if we can drive up the level of safety culture in the profession, then there is a good reason to think that we can improve levels of engagement, job satisfaction, reduce levels of burnout, and increase joy at work, to return Marcella back to her happy state. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and such an interesting talk and such an interesting area of research as well. I'm thinking about the relationship between burnout and safety culture and mental health. Really, really interesting. So thank you very much for that.